Hey everybody, it's Jane Johnston with the BriarHillGroup at REMAX Camosun, host of Vancouver Island Time. I'm here with Andrew Plank for He Said, She Said, They Said. How are you doing, Andrew?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. Happy Monday to you.
Happy Monday.
So today we're going to talk about first-time buyers and how we help them acquire their first home. I know it's a nerve-wracking process for them. So first of all, what percentage of your business is first-time buyers?
I'd say maybe 20%. It's probably 25% first-time buyers. Yeah, 20%. Let's say that. Yeah.
Younger or older?
Well, ranging, I guess. As I'm getting older, everybody seems younger. But I've seen first-time buyers in their 50s, even 60s. It doesn't, when you think of first-time buyer, you sometimes think of someone who is, somewhere in their, early 20s or so, starting a family and so forth. But, there's lots of people who've been renting all their lives or have never actually had to buy a home. Maybe they had a family home that they moved into. So, yeah, all ages.
Also, I find, I just actually worked with a lady who she owned a long time ago. So she's been renting for a long time. So it is a whole new process.
Right.
I find.
Yeah, it's actually true. I mean, if somebody hasn't actually purchased a home, even in the last 5 years, it's still a lot of new processes and technology and legislation and everything. So yeah, but there's a different sense of trust in the process or expectation if you're a first-time buyer versus someone who is, even if you did it 30 years ago, you know what it's like to actually own a home. And there's not that fear of what am I getting into and actually owning a home, which I think is different.
Right. A lot of people who are looking at purchasing consider it a big threat to their financial well-being because they're afraid of having so much debt, but they don't realize that with the investment in their debt, they ended up in their own house, they end up paying off a lot more debt more quickly. Don't you find?
It's short-term pain. There's definitely, you're definitely upping all your expenses immediately. And then if you, it really depends on your timeline, but if you're in it for over 5 years, it should start showing you really huge benefits. So yeah, agreed.
I always tell my clients, buy and hold, buy and hold, buy and hold.
Yeah. If you can, hold on. And if you can afford to buy. That's generally when people say, is it a good time to buy? I've seen so many people with their own personal circumstances have be in a good position now, but things can change for them. But if they had actually purchased, I've lost you, Jane. If they had actually purchased when they would have been in a better position.
I was wiping the sweat from my brow.
Oh, that's what happened. Okay. All right. I don't know about you, but my phone's been going nuts this morning, and phone calls and texts and things coming through. So good old Monday mornings. So
do you do a buyer orientation? I do.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to meet with people, even if they're not a first-time buyer, and run through the process. And so there's a initial orientation run-through process, question and answer period, a bit of a presentation, and then I direct them to further information. And I also have a raft of emails that I send out based on the person's circumstances or scenario. But I have a buyer success program that
sounds very posh.
It does, doesn't it? Essentially just tries to preview all of the steps along the way. Here's what a contract looks like. Here's what negotiations look like. Here's the different types of property ownership in Victoria, that sort of thing. And, it's up to them to read it or not, but it gives that added level of just background.
Yeah. I find what I do is I do an orientation process, basically from beginning to end. I try not to overwhelm them with the contract at the beginning, although I could see with knowledge people, they would love that. But I find that what I say to them is, we're going to go through the process. We're going to come to points where you're going to have to make a decision. And I'm going to explain what the consequences of this decision here or here are going to be. So then you can decide to go that way or that way. But in the meantime, let's just get you looking. And I find often they're very prescriptive at the beginning, like they want very fine definition of their house, of their dream house. And then I always say that people buy on a price continuum. So everybody
on a price continuum. Right. So they figure out what price range they want to be in, and then they start to make compromises or understand what they can actually purchase within that range. And it may not be that their list of perfect home items don't actually all fit on there.
Right. And if they want their perfect home at the price, they're going to have to change the location.
Right. Yeah. Right. I remember being a first-time buyer and with my partner at the time, going around and looking at homes. And we were doing open housing at the time. We hadn't connected with a realtor. And, we were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and excited, and we, had been saving up, and we were watching the market get away from us because this was early 2000s as the prices were going up. And but we had this list, and we built this list of like the perfect home, and we were so proud of this list. We had all the stuff we wanted in a home. And I remember we met a realtor at an open house, and we loved her. We thought she was wonderful, and we thought, this is who we want to be our realtor. And so we gave her this list and said, help us find this. And she said, oh, I'm actually quite busy right now. Let me find another realtor for you. And it's not till later you realize it's like she just did not want to deal with people who were, a little out to lunch in terms of expectations.
So for us, same thing. We ended up, we were like, now that I realize it, like little ducklings waiting to be plucked by the evil eagle. But we went around, and ironically, I went into the Mosaic, which was just being built when I was first looking with Chris. And we went into it the other day with me and a client, and I was like, oh my God, I considered buying here.
Right.
Because I thought it was so cool. But now I realize how impractical it is for me anyway.
So for people who don't know, the Mosaic is a building on Fort Street that is somewhat industrial looking inside, and mostly
micro
lofts and a lot of concrete. And so it's not super welcoming. It can be a perfect home for many people, but maybe not long term.
Micro loft means you live in a bunk bed.
Pretty much. It's a very small space. Yeah.
Totally impractical.
It's a tiny home, but no wheels.
Exactly. And when people say they want a tiny home, I'm like, buy a condo. If you want a tiny home, buy a condo, because it's a better use of space. Like if you want to be environmentally conscious, then live in a condo, right? No.
Well, sometimes you do want something. I think I like the tiny home movement, but I think sometimes you do want the wheels, the ability to move, and the ability to actually have some grass under your feet. But it's definitely in terms of cost effectiveness, and yes, I think a lot of people are living in homes that are bigger than they need, and I always find it very funny and interesting when someone is, they're downsizing from a 3,000 square foot home. This is, a couple who's retiring, and they can't downsize into something under 2,000 square feet. And, because of all their stuff and their, toys and things they've collected over their lifetime. But having gone through various iterations of living in larger and smaller spaces, I can say that, it's a simpler and more satisfying life when you have less to carry around and deal with. So
yeah.
I'm a fan of living small if you can, but at the same time, not everybody can do that.
Yeah,
I agree with you. It's better. Yeah, it's better for the environment.
My dad used to say, "Don't let your stuff own you."
Yeah, my dad too. There's a scene in the movie The Labyrinth where there's a bunch of people coming along and putting stuff on the back of this woman, and it's all these like household items and stuff, and it's really just encrusting her with and weighing her down, and they're just trying to get her to stay where she is, and it's quite a interesting scene. And my dad loved that when he pointed it out to me. Maybe that's why. Yeah.
Have you ever seen the show with George Carlin where he talks about moving?
Maybe. I'm
So
sure it was funny.
he talks about stuff. So you acquire more stuff, and then you have to move to the next house, and then you acquire more stuff, and you have to move to the next house, and the house gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then your stuff outlives you anyway. I find that on the other end where we're working with the states, that's sad when you see how much stuff people have left and how it has sometimes just no meaning.
What's saddest to me is that it doesn't always have meaning for the children or for the other family members, and it just sort of disappears. And it's only really had, well, I think the saddest part is I think a lot of people save these things for the next generations, and they don't get, oh, here comes the sun again. This timing is great for this. But they don't get held on. And I think it's one of the most important things people can do is maybe videotape or talk about their life and share what these things mean to them. So there's some form of record, because it is the saddest thing to help sell an estate and definitely see all these things just moving on.
Okay, so let's talk about buyers.
First time buyers again. Yeah.
And actually, it's a good segue. Is I actually recently sold a house, and the buyers wanted everything in the house that the sellers were leaving, and the sellers were like, "Yay, that's a big load off their shoulders." So
you sold it like you had the listing, or you were the buyer's agent?
I was the listing agent. Yeah.
Okay, because I thought maybe I had been competing with you last week, because I lost out to some folks who we were in a competing offer situation, and we lost out to folks who said, we'll just take everything. We'll deal with it, because it was an estate. And,
right.
Otherwise, we'd been pretty close. So it can actually be useful for some folks if they just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. So we ended up, the sellers actually ended up getting a lot taken away, but still. The buyers, who are two young men, were happy because they had a couch, chairs, and dining room table, and they were starting out, so it was really helpful. So, what do you think buyers should look for? Let's make an avatar of our ideal first-time buyer. So, I'm thinking like someone in like around 30.
So, wait a sec. When you say ideal, are you saying like the representative first-time buyer, or an ideal first-time buyer from our perspective?
Representative.
Yeah.
Around 30, usually a couple.
I'd say there's, in your late 20s, early 30s, for sure. Couples often, life changes tend to provoke a change in real estate or home living situation, whether it's getting married or having a child or, breaking up even if it's a couple that are, I feel like I'm hiding again. Hang on a second. Could you put me on hold? I'm going to pull this blind down.
Yes, I'm going to describe my ideal buyer.
Okay.
This is why this show is so funny. Okay, so the most important thing, actually, what I do is I tell them they have to have a relationship with a mortgage broker, and even if they want to buy in 2 years, have that relationship now so that they can develop the credit to purchase the home well, and then there won't be any surprises. The other is don't buy new things like a new car or big expenses, and kind of like get their credit in shape. I also tell them to get a Dropbox folder going and just start thinking about sticking their notices of assessment in there every year. I do that.
Yeah.
And then also putting in pay stubs and any letters of employment, because that's what the lender will want to see.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you're thinking of, don't change jobs if you're thinking of buying a home, because oftentimes they want to see that you've been somewhere for 6 months or beyond the probationary period and all of that. So definitely have some consistency. You can change it all up after you've bought the home, but in the meantime, you're trying to create this perfect situation where the lender is looking at you and ticking all the boxes and you fit in them.
And I also tell them, so for every dollar you have about 4 more to spend. So, because you want 20% down so that you can avoid CMHC. So if you can just start putting money away sooner rather than later, it's helpful. And if you have a rental, to have a copy of your rental agreement in that Dropbox folder. Are you taking notes?
Yeah, I do, because every once in a while I want to sort of make a comment back, and it's just how my brain works. Is it's very scattered, and I go off on tangents. So this helps me to come back.
Okay, you go ahead.
Well, the one thing I would say, you were talking about saving up to 20% for CMHC, and if you can do that, that's great, but it's not always easy or possible. And especially having experienced markets where the prices of homes are rising so fast that you're actually losing money by trying to save money. And if you actually, where again, I say all the time, if you can afford to buy now and you want to buy, then buy now, because you may not be able to do so later.
Right.
Simply because, the market might get away from you, or some legislation might change, or you may have a change in your job situation, which doesn't decrease the amount of money you're making, but it does decrease the ability for those lenders to tick the boxes that you fit into.
So what I say to them is, when's the best time to plant a tree? Always today.
Yeah, right. Well, geez, Jane, that's so wise.
I know. I've got a few good ones.
Do you? Okay. Can I use that? It just sounds so thoughtful and wise.
Oh, Danielle is commenting here. I leased my car, so when I went to remortgage her house, it didn't count as debt. That's interesting.
Oh, she leased her car.
Oh.
And it didn't count as debt. It does count as a payment, though, that you're making.
Yeah, they do look at it as gross debt service ratio. So, yeah.
So gross debt, yeah, and we're not mortgage brokers, but the gross debt service ratio is, they're going to look at the amount of debt you have and how much you have to pay to service that debt. And that comes out of what they'll give you for qualifying for the mortgage. So, love times, good times.
So,
yeah.
What else did you have on your list of points there?
Oh, you know what? I just was doodling. So.
Oh, I thought I was saying something important.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other thing is, where I think that a lot of people don't think about, is a relationship they're going to have with the other buyer if they're going to purchase together. So they either have a tenancy in common or common law tenancy. And so in one case, if they die, the other person will get the property, and the other case, they could own it 50-50, and they could, it's like shares.
Right. Yeah. One is like having 50% shares in the company, and the other person having 50% shares in the company. And then the other way is you're both co-owning it completely, and whatever interest goes back to the owner, the other person completely. And that's the more common one that most people tend to choose. But if there's a reason for protecting your own assets, or you're disproportionately putting money in, let's say somebody is going in with 100% of the down payment and is going to be supporting the mortgage, and they've got some sort of side agreement, you might want to have only one person on title, or do it 90-10 or something like that. And also, that's also a situation where you often have family money coming in. And so you might be that you can actually have a hybrid where there's the co-ownership for 70% of the ownership, but then there's a third-party investor who's got a 30% that's the share kind of holding. So it can there's lots of different scenarios, and that's why it is important to talk to mortgage broker and accountant and those things. That gets more complicated, and it's not as common, but these are things to consider.
I also tell, so sometimes a parent may gift money to a buyer, or in the case of an inheritance. So just make sure you have an agreement of how the split is going to happen, if it's going to happen, so that each side can walk away.
For the house. Yeah. Yeah. And, where you said form a relationship with your mortgage broker early on, and obviously you're already in a relationship with those people because they've talked to you as well. But it's definitely for anyone who's considering buying a home and wants to buy a home at some point in their life, is a first-time buyer. You're 15 years old, you're 19 years old, you're 23, whatever it is. But there's nothing wrong. And Jane and I are both happy to talk to anyone who is curious about real estate at any point, and to help to sort of guide or direct some of the thought process or provide information. And it's never too early to start thinking about it and start to understand the process. And it's one of many options if you're looking at investing in anything in life. But real estate is great because you get to live in it too as your first time purchase. And that's usually the security that is worth so much more than just the income value.
We actually bought our first place and never lived in it.
Really?
Really,
oh, yeah, that's right. The Souk? No.
What? Machosen.
Machosen, yeah, okay. I remember that.
Coming from Toronto, I was like, hey, actually you helped me sell it when I resold it, right?
Did I?
Yes, you did. So, yeah, we just realized when we looked at the cash flow that if we put a certain amount of money down towards a house and then had that pay out, it covered our mortgage. So
right.
we were able to make money while living in a house, living in a rental. That's where a rental made sense. So somebody else paid our mortgage. Then we refinanced it 5 years later and got a new roof. And then we took the equity out of that to buy our second house.
Right. So it was a nice stepping stone for you.
Yeah. So always looking at the advantage.
Now, did capital gains then, how was capital gains for you guys on that then? Was it something you?
So we kept the first house. And so then we had two houses. And then we sold the first house, which was our primary residence.
Okay. Okay.
And
so you actually moved into the rental at some point then?
No, but it was the only house we owned, so it was our primary residence.
Oh, okay. So that's how they look at it from the legal. Okay, good.
That's how I guess so. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer.
Okay. CRA, if you're listening, nothing to see here.
Yeah. But anyway, we ended up never living in that place. So it was an ugly house on a great lot. Yeah. Okay. So we're going out and we're reviewing with our clients. Do you find that it's helpful that you attend home inspections when you're then subsequently viewing a property with a buyer?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you've ever read a building inspection report, even on a home that is really spotless, I will. Even that's really spotless, the reports are sometimes just scary to read. But when you sit through with the building inspector and you're there with your clients and you're, there's so much you can then ask great questions of the inspector and get some more context and just build a better understanding and help your clients to educate themselves and get a better sense. Because, yeah, and that, and that leads to like a lot of first-time buyers want to bring in or solicit. We talk about this after we maybe finish with the building inspections, but soliciting advice from people who are not experts in the fields, perhaps. And I mean, everyone wants to ask for their opinions from friends and relatives and so forth, but we've all seen people come through there. I just had this recently on a listing that the father comes through to do the building inspection instead of a licensed building inspector.
It's happening to me on Friday.
It did, yeah. So
it will. Yeah, I'm like, okay.
On Friday. Yeah. And so then they notice things that maybe a building inspector wouldn't get caught up on, and they don't notice other things that a building inspector would actually catch. And so they're kind of paying attention to the things they shouldn't and missing things they should. Because they don't have a process.
Well, they don't have a process, and also a building inspector doesn't have a vested interest on whether or not you buy the place or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they don't have the rose-colored glasses or the dark glasses on. They're just looking at the house as a system.
Yeah. If I as a father were looking at a home for one of my children buying a home, I would be looking for all the problems and all the, the things that could be an escape for them if needs be. And it's you can sometimes be a little too overprotective.
So my pet peeve is being at a home inspection and the inspector pulls up his computer and flips through the photos. And I'm like, we're only literally probably at the most 15 feet away from anything that you could point out. Can we walk around the house?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like one time one of the inspectors was talking about rot in a windowsill, and I'm like, oh, there are like 20 windows. Which window?
Right, exactly.
And you're more likely to remember it, to be visual, if we go around, right?
Yeah, physical and visual, like to actually physically stand in the location and look at it, because referencing a photo, you know, which you're going to look at again and again, and there's obviously that time period between when you've agreed to purchase the home and you actually get to move into it, and sometimes that's 3 months or more. So yeah, being able to actually go up and have your own inspection and look and see that, okay, well, that rot is actually a little bit of rot, or that's really deep, because a photo doesn't tell you everything at all. Yeah.
So speaking of this, do you add clauses to your contracts for first-time buyers that they can go in more than once other than the inspection?
I do. I always add a clause for appraisal, because that's a given that quite often the appraisers are going to come in after the fact. And then it really depends on what the clients are. We'll have a discussion around that. And it depends on, are we competing? What's the scenario with the sellers? It's really I don't do it as a matter of course, but it's definitely a discussion piece.
I do it if it's a big reno job.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we can bring contractors in.
Yep.
It takes a lot of energy, though, on the part of everybody to bring people in.
There's a lot to coordinate, and it can be, and buyers are so excited. They want to see it often as many times as they can. And they don't have a sense of, this is where it comes back to managing expectations, and especially with first-time buyers. And sometimes with people who have bought homes before, but they didn't have a great experience. But managing expectations, so they understand kind of what's normal and what's to be expected, and what can we actually ask for, and what's really kind of out of the bounds of what's considered okay to ask for. And you can certainly, getting permission to access a home is awesome. Getting permission to start renos on a home, not so.
No. I always say that's a no-no. It's funny, everybody always thinks they listen to this channel, WIFM. You know what that is?
Yeah, what's in it for me?
What's in it for me? Yeah. And you're like, I want to do the reno because when I move in, I want it to be renovated. I'm like, well, imagine the renovation doesn't go well.
Yeah.
And you show up, and meanwhile, the seller, maybe it's even vacant, but you show up and it hasn't gone well and you don't want it anymore. So no.
Well, from the seller's perspective, they've got the what's in it for me, and you've got to just put your hat on for both perspectives. And if you're granting access to a place, you sold it for, let's say, $800,000, this place, and you're the seller, and then somebody's going to come in and rip out the walls and maybe take out a bearing wall that they didn't actually get proper permits to do, and essentially
ruin a house.
Yeah. And then there's the liability issues. So no, these are things that generally realtors will be very protective about for their clients, and say, no, we'll give you access. You can do some quotes and so forth, but nothing invasive and no changes. Wait till you've moved in.
It's also about putting stuff in the house before possession. That's a no-no too, because imagine something happens with the house, and all of a sudden we have some sort of insurance claim. So that's often buyers, can I just put my stuff in the day before? No.
Yeah, I mean, putting it in the garage, and sometimes that happens, and it's, you've got to think about the probabilities and risks, and what's and versus the goodwill of everyone. And it's definitely in an ideal situation, you're not putting your own client that you're representing at risk. But if you're representing the buyers, you're going to definitely be asking, can we get in? Can we just get the key to the code to the garage? We don't need to get in the house. And as a side note, one of the things I recommend in terms of it's just a general recommendation, but insurance coverage begins at midnight on the completion date.
Yeah.
So you may not get possession till a day later, but you actually have to have insurance in place at midnight on the date that the transaction happens. So even if transaction happens at 4 p.m. with the lawyers, it was midnight that earlier in the day, that you actually become responsible for any fires or anything. So what if a fire begins at 11 a.m. the day before and starts doing damage, and then, you know, by 1 p.m. the place is fully engulfed. 1 a.m. it's fully engulfed.
The cause is before.
The cause is before, but which insurance company pays out? You got two insurance companies arguing over this. So I always recommend try to just get the same insurance company. It's a small. Then you've got one company responsible for both sides, and it's just a small deal, but it can make a big difference in that one time where maybe it's going to happen. So if you're going to have that kind of thing, that's just a small. That's a gimme for you, Jane.
Okay, well, the other thing is, here's a gimme for you, is for for when you're insuring a condo, is get your insurance condo coverage under the same company as the building. Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
And so, okay, you're going through the process, you write the offer, and big deposit, small deposit?
What have they got? Yeah. So deposit goes towards purchase price, but you've got to keep some of your closing costs back. And I think go with as little as you possibly can, but still be reasonable.
Okay, so my answer to that is what's the strategy here?
Yeah, exactly.
So if you're going to lowball, you don't want a big deposit.
Right. Yeah.
If you want to win in a multiple offer, go with your biggest one, just like boom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're laying down and you're saying, I've got this money, and even if we're subject to financing, we've put down, you know, $100,000 deposit. There's no question that we've got the money to make this happen. And you're right. Yeah, if it's all about positioning. So if you are making a quote lowball offer, you want things that. Well, here's the other part of it, though, Jane, and this is always a counterpoint to this. Yes, I agree, a low offer, but still reasonable. Not so much that the other agent's going to look at that and say, well, we have to counter this because, you know, sure, you might agree to this lowball price because you're desperate to sell, but, you know, this deposit is just not enough to hold. So we're going to have to counter it. And if we're going to counter it, let's increase the price too. So anytime you are looking at generating a counter offer, you've got to think like, how can I write this offer so that it's just acceptable as written if possible?
Yeah, because you want them to just accept it and send it back.
Yeah. So finding out the dates that are ideal for the sellers, talking to your buyers about those dates and determining what can work for them. Anything you can do that doesn't generate a counter offer back and makes it acceptable can actually save your clients time and money. Which
includes being very, very careful with your contract, because we've just recently changed web forms. Mm-hmm. And it's causing all manner of issues with contracts, numbering, dates. Yep. Oh my gosh, it's awful.
You know what's faster? Just print it out now and fill it out manually.
Well, we're starting
back to old school.
Yeah, we're doing that.
Yeah.
Danielle's laughing in the background. Hold on a second. Danielle, I can see you.
We can't hear you, Danielle.
I like to fill that online.
She likes to fill them out online. Oops, there, she's gone.
She's disappeared again. Okay.
Yeah, I find that it's a little TD things that the new forms don't do. So really it's gone backwards. And anyway, all in the sake of progress.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we get the offer, we write the offer, and then what is a counter offer? I always say the offer is a question, the counter offer is an answer.
Okay, and sometimes another question. Yeah. I agree with you. I think they're both a question and an answer. The offer is a question and an answer as well. It could be an answer to the seller's question of, am I going to sell this home? And hopefully, if it can be, the more answer it can be, the better. But you're right. It's always a questioning, repositioning back and forth piece. They call that negotiations, I think. Oh, yeah. I've heard of that somewhere.
I went to a certified negotiation expert course.
Same.
And it was interesting. And she categorized different types of negotiators, and some are conflictive and some are looking, what you call them?
More collaborative.
I'm collaborative.
Yeah.
And I just find it goes more easily. I mean, we all want the buyer to buy the home and the seller, and you just say, okay, well, here's, like, you have to be creative in your responses.
You have to understand who you're negotiating with, and if they're negotiating with someone who is conflict oriented or, you know, going to butt heads and really not, and you know, some people take the idea that I'm going to represent my clients means I'm going to have them win no matter what. And in the end, they end up fighting tooth and nail for every little element of the contract. And it, if you're negotiating with that type of person, you have to actually, even a collaborative agent is going to have to be non-collaborative at times. But that's the thing about a collaborative agent, is you have the flexibility of moving back and forth between, as you recognize what you're doing.
Right.
But when you're working, when a collaborative agent works with another collaborative agent, you're feeling out everyone's positions, you're discussing them, and some of the negotiations are happening. They just happen a lot more smoothly. So it's always a great piece. But yeah,
right.
When it comes to the negotiating for a first-time buyer, it's, again, it comes back to managing expectations too. You know, you're going to make this offer, and it's possibly not going to be accepted as written, even though you feel like, you know, you can't afford to pay more than this, or you feel like this is, you know, outside of your comfort zone. You know, the seller has their own position, and they're going to come back with this counter proposal, this other question or an answer, and it can go back and forth a number of times. And don't give up.
One of my clients, yeah, I've had negotiations that have gone on for days.
Yeah.
And I find sometimes it's just helpful to we're really talking about negotiation as opposed to first-time buyers. But anyway, just so they're aware.
This is all helpful to a first-time buyer, I would hope.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah.
So what's helpful to do sometimes as a negotiator is just to say, okay, you know what? Everybody needs to sleep on it. Take a break. Right. Come back tomorrow. We'll leave it open till noon. And we start in the negotiations again in the morning, and then we realize, okay, you know what, that thing that I thought was important to me isn't important to me, or the other thing that wasn't is more important. So, and I find often if you can figure out what the pain point is for the buyer or seller, then you can often just solve the problem really quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I once had a buyer who kept lowballing. He and his wife kept lowballing all the time.
Right.
So like the third offer, I'm new to real estate, but I asked a good question. I said, what's your timeline for buying? I should ask the same at the beginning. And the wife said, a month. At the same time, the husband said, a year. And I'm like, I think you guys need to talk.
Right.
So then I said to husband, why a year? And he goes, well, I'm just a bit afraid of interest rates going up. I think they were 4%.
Okay.
I'm like, that's pretty good. 4%. I think we were coming down from 7 or 8.
Right.
So I said, well, why don't you get a variable rate mortgage? And they perform better over time. So anyway, they bought a house, and that smoothed the way. We went to the next house, and he says, they wanted a house with a horse in the backyard. I'm like, how do you even find a house?
Yeah. You know, Jane, how much does a horse cost?
It's about $10,000 to $20,000.
Okay, so no, it's not worth it.
So anyway, we go into this house on Shohan in Central Saanich, and guess what's in the backyard?
The horse?
The horse.
Uh-huh. So they bought it.
So he's like, the price, it had been on the market 3 weeks, and it was a slow market. It was October or something. And he goes, let's offer. Like, it was $550. Let's offer $560. What if somebody else buys it? And I said, we're not going to offer $550 even. We're going to offer a little lower, because I'm not going to, I don't tell people what to offer, but I made suggestions, and then we got money off. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about offering the perspective again that, you know, this has been on market a while, and you know, you actually don't need to offer above asking price in order to secure this. But that shows how subjective this is. You know, he was willing to wait a year, and then suddenly was just, you know, ready to jump. And it's like, there's a saying for realtors that I've heard before, and it's helpful for just when you are talking with clients, and it's first-time buyers to people who are, you know, in all positions, but they need to have a when, a where, and a why. And without all three, it's really difficult. It can be difficult to work effectively and quickly to secure a home for them. If they don't have a place to be, a reason to be there, and a time frame, it's still possible, but it can expand the boundaries. So I'm always, you know, that's one of the early conversations, is to try to determine these things. But the other side, like, and especially for first-time buyers, and I've worked with buyers who consistently lowball. And by lowball, I mean they're making offers that are well off the asking price, and maybe they're unreasonable in the sense of their expectation of what a seller would be willing to accept, given time on market and all of this. So, and you've got to kind of read between the lines. And I always feel like, you know, if you can, it's fears generally. There's always a fear in the background. What is the fear? If you can identify that and speak to it, you know, and often it's fear of making a mistake, and you can manage that. You can provide some insurance against making a mistake by getting a property under asking price, in theory.
Well,
that's, I think, that their logic. And
the buyer's always hoping that the price is going to go down, or I mean, go up over time. So they want to offer
fearing
less.
that it will go down, fearing that they'll make a mistake and overpay, or
Okay.
Yeah,
well, I find that seller is betting the market that they've peaked, and the buyer is betting that the market hasn't peaked, or is going to go, if that they're going to go down. I don't know.
Well, you think worst case scenario, and you know, obviously it's a large investment, and especially as a first time buyer, when you think of a first time buyer, typically they don't have a lot of assets behind them. When you're talking with someone who has, you know, sold their home that they have, they own outright, there's no mortgage, to upsize to a larger home, and the vagaries of the market, the shifts of fortune, are going to be good words,
yeah. Nice.
Are going to be less of a concern to them. If the market goes down 100 grand next year on average, but they're planning to live there for another 10, it really makes very, very little difference to them. But if someone is a first-time buyer and buys a $400,000 condo, and the market for condos goes down 100 grand, and their deposit and down payment and all was obviously less than that, they're now underwater and paying for something that's worth less than they paid for it, and they're really not wanting that to happen. And so first-time buyers are more subject to that kind of fear, because they have less behind them, and they also don't have the experience of having, you know, sat through and owned through different markets. So.
I find for me, one of the things, buyers feel urgency. Let's say you're showing them 10 homes and 7 have accepted offers, and they're like, oh my God, I gotta, and so they feel confident in purchasing. But when you have 10 homes that they've selected, and then you're showing them all 10, they're like, you know, and they start to take their time. You get longer days on market, and that's when you get the shift. So, and we know the ratio, I think it's about 20%. So list to sale ratio. So in 2017 in January, it was 95% ratio list to sale, and it was 7 days on market average. Now we're looking much longer, and we're on more of a balanced market, moving towards a bit of a seller's market for that reason.
Right now, for single family homes, I feel like we're strongly in a seller's market. And, you know, I'm dealing with multiple offers and so forth.
But in the condo market, it's not.
Pardon me?
The condo market's not.
The condo market is not, but I was just chatting with a colleague actually yesterday about this, and it's this has happened in the past too, where the gap between the one market takes off, and then the gap becomes so wide that people then realize that they've forgotten about condos, and they just look so good price wise compared to houses now, that the condos then do the catch up. So if our market remains hot, the condos they're lagging behind, but they will bungee cord up at some point.
Bounce up.
They'll bounce up. Yeah. But right now, people, I think, would prefer a house. But if it gets to the point that again, houses become, you know, out of reach for many people, then they'll again start looking at condos and townhouses and so forth.
Yeah, as long as there's a good alternative for the for a buyer. So like right now I'm finding with a buyer I'm looking at in the 425 range, 400 to 425, is I'm getting a lot of feedback from the agents. So is your client buying? Are they buying? You want to buy? Put it down in writing.
What is, oh, you mean like make an offer?
Make an offer.
Yeah. They're saying like, you know, bring us something because, yeah, we'd really like to sell this property. It's been sitting on market for a long time.
Yeah, and they're getting a bit antsy. When do you find, what's the time that a seller starts to get antsy on price? On
price? Oh.
Like when does the price elasticity start to increase?
It really depends. I find that so unique to each seller. I mean, sellers can be so under the gun to sell that they will be wanting to reduce price right off the bat. I find it's usually the other side of the equation where they hope springs eternal and they just don't want to drop their price. There's definitely a lot of, again, talking about expectations is, you know, if your home's been on market for, you know, 2 weeks and we're getting very little showings, that's probably an indication that we're outside the market, unless it's a very unique home.
Or it's timing.
Yeah, but if it's been on market and you're getting lots of showings, and yeah, I mean, there's so many different factors to that one. How about you? What do you think?
I think it's about 3 weeks, just looking at the emotional up and down of a seller. So they come out of the gate and they've got the marketing and the pictures and the house sign is up and they're like ready to sell, and then they don't get an offer, and so they go down a bit, and then they, you know, they start to get optimistic because they have a showing, and then about 3 weeks they're like, shoot, you know what, I think we're too high priced. That's when reality hits in.
Yeah, and it's not just about the price. I think it's about the inconvenience factor for a lot of people. Like if you've been on market for 3 weeks, a month, 3 months, you have been keeping your home, in theory, not all people do this, but you've been keeping your home clean, you've been accommodating showings, you've been really, it's exhausting to keep it all together. And not everybody lives in a Martha Stewart home style, right? And so it can be hard to keep it up. And when you've got children and so forth that are, you know, getting up and making a big mess in the morning, and then you get a showing notice, you get to the point where you're like, okay, you know, obviously this place isn't selling at the price I'm asking, and I'd really like to get this moving. So what do we have to do to make this move? And that's a hard question to answer, though, because especially because the market moves around too. And I mean, we could talk about micro markets too, but and that's the problem, I think, with pricing a home and understanding that you could list a home and all of the potential buyers have just sort of signed up on contracts recently, or there's just kind of a lull, and then it comes back gangbusters 2 weeks later. Or the other way around, where, you know, you list a little too high, and then all the potential buyers buy other properties, and then 2 weeks later you decide to lower your price, but those buyers are all gone and you've got nothing.
Right. But as a buyer, what you need to do is be in touch, I think, with an agent who works both sides of the market, because I find as a buyer, I'm listening to what they're saying when they're viewing a property. So then when I go to list a property, I'm more effective, I think, in listing at a price that's reasonable.
That's the thing. And absolutely. I love the fact, you know, I know that there's a lot of agents who are just buyer's agents or just sellers, just listing agents. And they wear that one hat all the time, and they don't actually experience the other side. And so being able to put on both hats, because you know, being a realtor means you do have to be empathetic. You have to understand and put yourself in other people's shoes. And when you're running through homes with clients, you're seeing from their perspective. And then it's been interesting to see the same home with different clients wearing a hat for each of them. I've seen it where, oh yeah, this is a great home versus, oh, this home sucks. And it's the same home, but from you're wearing that hat. But definitely being able to see it from both perspectives gives you like buyer and seller. It gives me a lot of extra oomph, power to to be able to give good advice and to be able to say, you know what, we definitely, I see what you're saying. You love your home. You've lived here for many years. You see all the values and how it compares to the other homes, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. I've also, and I don't want to denigrate from that. I don't want to take away from that. But at the same time, you know, I also wear my buyer's hats. And as a buyer, I've been going through homes in this price range, and I've seen homes that are, you know, superior to this home in various ways. Not exactly the same. You know, you have a better kitchen, but this other one has a double car garage, and so on and so forth. If someone has X amount of dollars to spend, what's the compelling reason to buy yours over another? And I can tell you that when I'm working with buyers in this price range, they're going to consistently bid on properties that are a little bit lower.
Cliff is saying, I've gone from being an agent to a seller. Interesting emotional change. And I will say, Cliff, I manage a lot of realtors who are selling their properties, and you guys are the worst clients.
I totally agree, Cliff. When I sold my home, I went from, and I brought in a realtor who I'd been working with to represent the sale. And I was, you know.
Not me.
It was not you, no. And it should have been probably. But you kind of, you really, you expect more of the other agent. Not, you're definitely emotional, and you question yourself. Am I making the right decision?
I think it's only human.
Bought a home as a buyer too. I just recently bought a home, and I represented myself in the buy. And I actually had to go and present my offer competing. And it was a really surreal and interesting position to be in as both the buyer and the agent at that point. And it works. It was successful. We ended up being able to buy it, but it, you know, it's nerve wracking.
Well, I find like
what we do.
Your realtor is your face for you. So you really want to get somebody who's going to represent you well, who's going to tell your story the way you want it to be told, who won't be indiscreet, and who will protect your negotiating position. These are all the fiduciary duties that we have as a listing and buyer agent. So if, you know, you don't want, sometimes I think I have what's called nervous sellers. So people who give it all away and, or, you know, talk too much, or who are at the home when a buyer comes by because they want to explain all the great things. And the buyer meantime thinks, okay, well, if I go into a store, it's easier to take the shirt off the rack than it is off your back. So I'm going to go for the one off the rack because you've now made this very personal, me buying this from you. So it's handy to have an agent who's going to be positive and emotionally intelligent as well. Here's another comment. Found it very interesting when I was first-time seller, that selling was so difficult. I thought buying was the hard part, but selling is a whole other set of fears and emotion. Great conversation, you two. It turns out we're having a very popular podcast for realtors.
Well, it's funny because if you look at your friend list on Facebook or on social media, it's a lot of other realtors. So of course we're being watched by our colleagues.
And actually, I wanted to say, like,
we should get them in here.
Yeah. Well, that's what he said. She said. They said. Right. We can invite guests. Okay, so we're coming to the end here. I'm wondering what you want to talk about next week. I think we should. Well, I was going to say let's focus on sellers, but we're kind of doing both this week.
Well, I think whatever we talk about will be freewheeling because that's just how it seems to go. But it's good to have a theme.
I think we should talk about getting ready for the COVID wave.
For the next wave? The next wave. Okay.
Selling in the COVID times.
Yeah, we can definitely talk. I mean, how it's been so far, and then maybe what it's going to look like and how to deal with that, for sure. I mean, it's definitely changing how people use the tech and interact with properties. So for sure, let's do it.
Okay. All right, you guys, is anything you want to say? Closing remarks. Andrew Plank.
Oh, I thought you were waiting for comments.
No, you.
Oh, closing remarks, you guys. You said you guys.
I meant you.
Me, okay. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and this is fun, and we're looking forward to doing more of this. Thanks, Cliff.
Yeah, so we're going to be on Mondays at 10 a.m. and we've made a commitment to do this for the ongoing future. We want to talk about the real happenings in real estate. As you can see, we have similar values and different approaches, so we want to provide a well-rounded perspective. I'm Jane Johnston with the BriarHillGroup at REMAX Camosun. If you want to get in touch with me, you can. Here's my number and my email. And Andrew?
I'm Andrew Plank with the Andrew Plank Group at lePage.
Modern tools and old-fashioned service,
that's
right?
That's my slogan, modern tools with old-fashioned service. Yes.
All right. All right, you guys.
Cheers.
Have a good day, and we'll see you next Monday at 10 a.m. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.